Beneath the fractured moon, a single howl echoed like a forgotten vow, carving silence into the frost-bitten night. Ilara's breath hung in the air like a ghost, fragile and fleeting against the relentless gale that whipped through the iron peaks. She stumbled forward, her bare feet numb against the jagged snow, each step a betrayal of her body's will to survive. The Matilha's verdict had been swift, merciless, a whisper of treason that sealed her fate. "Spy," they had snarled, their eyes gleaming with the feral light of suspicion. She, the quiet Omega who mended wounds and whispered secrets to the wind, branded a betrayer for shadows she never cast, banished at dawn, left to the wilds where the weak were claimed by the cold, or worse, by the prowling packs of the borderlands. The wind howled its own judgment, tearing at her threadbare cloak, the fabric whispering against her skin like accusations. Snowflakes clung to her lashes, blurring the world into a monochrome haze of white and grey, where the mountains loomed like ancient sentinels, indifferent to her plight. Her fingers, raw and trembling, clutched the one remnant of her life before, a silver necklace, its pendant a delicate vial etched with lunar phases, now stained with a single drop of dried blood. Her own, drawn in the ritual of oath that bound her to the pack. It swung against her chest, cold as ice, a weight that both anchored and condemned her. The blood within was no mere stain, it was her mark. The essence of loyalty, spilled in a desperate bid to prove her innocence, only to be dismissed as deceit. She collapsed against a boulder, the stone biting into her palms like teeth. The cold seeped into her bones, a slow poison that mirrored the ache in her heart. Why them? The question clawed at her mind, unbidden as memories flooded in, nights by the hearth, tending to the wounded alphas with herbs and quiet words, her Omega nature a balm they once cherished. But whispers had grown into roars, sightings of invaders at the gates, maps that shouldn't exist, and her silhouette in the wrong place at the wrong hour. The Alpha King himself had turned away, his gaze heavy with the burden of rule, uttering the banishment with a voice like cracking ice. "Exile," he had commanded, his words final as the closing of the great oak doors behind her. Ilara's chest heaved, sobs swallowed by the wind. The moon above watched, its light silvering the snow into a deceptive serenity. But she knew the truth of these peaks. They devoured the Forsaken. Weaves distant pierced the night, wolves or perhaps the spirits of the Deusa, calling her to account. She pressed the necklace to her lips, tasting the metallic tang of old blood, a reminder that survival was not mercy, but defiance. Her body, frail by Omega standards, trembled not just from cold, but from the unraveling of her soul. What strength was there in gentleness when it was twisted into suspicion? The philosophy of the pack had always preached unity under the moon's gaze. Yet here she was, alone, her faith fraying like the hem of her cloak, hours blurred into eternity as she forced herself onward, the path descending into a shadowed ravine where pines bowed under snow's burden. The air grew thicker, laced with the scent of pine resin and something sharper. Smoke, faint but insistent, carried on the breeze. Her senses, heightened by desperation, caught it. The acrid bite of burning wood mingled with the coppery undernote of blood. Fresh blood. Her heart stuttered, instincts warring between flight and curiosity. Invaders, or her own pack, come to finish what exile began. She crouched low, the snow muffling her movements, her eyes scanning the gloom. There in the distance, a flicker of firelight danced against the cliffs, a lone campfire, sputtering against the wind. Figures moved in its glow, but not the familiar silhouettes of her kin. Strangers, armored in steel etched with foreign runes, their voices a guttural murmur that spoke of conquest. Ilara's pulse thundered in her ears, the necklace burning cold against her skin, as if alive with warning. She was no warrior, her hands meant for healing, not harm, but the spy's shadow they had painted on her stirred now, unbidden. Had she truly seen nothing in those shadowed councils? Or was this the Deuce's cruel jest, thrusting her toward a truth that could redeem or destroy? The wind shifted, carrying a low growl, not wolf, but something deeper, more human, laced with pain. A man staggered into view from the tree line, his form cloaked in a mantle torn and bloodied, the fabric dark with crimson that seeped from a gash across his shoulder. He was broad, regal even in ruin, his hair matted with snow and sweat, eyes scanning the night with the haunted vigilance of one who knew betrayal's sting. An alpha, she sensed it instinctively, the raw power that hummed beneath his wounds, tempered by a melancholy that hung about him like mist. He collapsed near the fire's edge, the invaders oblivious or uncaring, their laughter coarse as they warmed their hands. Ilara froze, her breath a shallow rhythm in the silence. Fear coiled in her gut, sharp as the cold, but curiosity bloomed alongside it, a fragile spark against the despair. Who was he, this broken king of the wilds, marked by guilt in every labored breath? The moon dipped lower, casting long shadows that danced like fates intertwining. She should run, vanish into the peaks as the exiled were meant to. Yet the necklace pulsed against her heart, its bloodied vial a silent command, witness endure, perhaps even heal. In the howl of the wind, she heard the Deuce's whisper. Redemption was not given. It was seized from the jaws of the storm. As the first flakes of a new squall began to fall, Ilara edged closer, the snow swallowing her footsteps, her world narrowing to the fire's glow and the enigma it cradled. The night held its breath, and so did she. The squall descended like a shroud, veiling the world in swirling white, but Ilara pressed on, her body a shadow among shadows. The fire's glow pulled her inexorably, a beacon in the chaos, its flames licking the night with tongues of orange and gold that warred against the encroaching dark. The invaders, 3 of them, hulking figures in fur-lined cloaks and armor scarred by battles unseen, huddled closer to the blaze, their faces ruddy with warmth and mead. They spoke in low, guttural tones, words laced with the thrill of the hunt, oblivious to the fragile life ebbing at their feet. The alpha lay sprawled on the frozen earth, his chest rising in ragged bursts, the mantle around him a tattered banner of what might once have been royal finery. Blood soaked the wool, dark and viscous, pooling beneath him like an accusation spilled from the heavens. Ilara's instinct screamed retreat. Omega frailty was no match for such peril, but her feet betrayed her, carrying her to the tree line's edge. She crouched behind a gnarled pine, its branches heavy with ice, the scent of resin sharp in her nostrils, mingling with the metallic tang of his wound. Who was he? Not one of the invaders, that much was clear. His bearing spoke of command, even in collapse. His jaw set with the quiet defiance of a man who had stared down empires. A gust tore through the ravine, carrying his scent to her, pine and storm, undercut by the raw earthiness of alpha power, tempered by something deeper, a sorrow that resonated in her bones, like the distant weevo of a lone wolf. Her necklace swung free as she leaned forward, the vial's blood catching the firelight. A crimson gleam that seemed to pulse in time with his labored breaths. Fear coiled tight in her chest, a vice of ice, yet curiosity unfurled beside it, tentative as a flame in the wind. She had healed warriors before, in the dim halls of her pack, drawing out pain with gentle hands and whispered prayers to the Deucer. But this was no hearthside mercy. This was the wilds, where trust was a blade turned inward. One of the invaders stirred, his boot nudging the alpha's side with casual brutality. "This one's done for," he grunted, his voice thick with the borderlands accent, eyes glinting like shards of obsidian. "Let the snow claim him. We've gates to breach come dawn." The others laughed, a coarse rumble that echoed off the cliffs, but the alpha's hand twitched, fingers curling into the snow as if grasping for a weapon long lost. Ilara's heart hammered, a frantic drum against her ribs. She should flee, melt into the storm as the exile did, her own blood too precious to spill for a stranger. Yet the Deusa's symbols whispered in her mind, the moon's fractured light above, the fire's defiant warmth, urging her toward the enigma bleeding out before her. Before reason could anchor her, a low growl escaped the Alpha's lips, not animal but human, laced with the authority of one who had once bent knees to his will. His eyes snapped open, storm-grey and piercing, locking onto the invaders with a gaze that silenced the laughter. "You dare," he rasped, voice like gravel under boot, pushing himself up on one elbow. Blood slicked his arm, but he moved with the fluid grace of a predator, even wounded. The invaders whirled, hands reaching for axes, but the Alpha lunged, a blur of motion that belied his frailty. He seized the nearest one's ankle, yanking with feral strength, toppling him into the snow. Chaos erupted, shouts, the clash of steel, the fire scattering embers like dying stars. Ilara's breath caught, her body frozen as the fight unfolded in visceral bursts, the Alpha's fist connecting with a jaw, cracking bone, a blade whistling past his ear, slicing the air with lethal promise. He fought not with rage, but precision, each strike measured by the weight of unspoken guilt, as if every blow atoned for sins etched into his soul. One invader fell, gurgling, his throat opened by the Alpha's borrowed dagger. The second charged, only to meet the earth with a thud, the Alpha's boot to his temple. The third backed away, eyes wide with sudden fear, vanishing into the squall with a curse that faded into the wind. Panting, the Alpha slumped against a rock, the mantle falling open to reveal the extent of his wounds, a gash across his ribs, shallow but weeping, and older scars that mapped a life of battles won and lost. His gaze swept the darkness, landing on her hiding place with unerring instinct. "Show yourself," he commanded, voice steady despite the tremor in his limbs, carrying the timbre of thrones and councils. Ilara's pulse thundered, instinct urging her to reveal the connection thrumming between them, an Omega's pull to an Alpha's storm, raw and undeniable. But denial surged, born of her exile's fresh scar. Trust was the chain that had bound her to betrayal. She stepped forward, snow crunching softly, her hands raised in the universal gesture of peace. The cold bit at her exposed skin, but his presence warmed the air, a subtle heat that warred with the fear knotting her gut. Up close, he was arresting, features chiseled by hardship, hair dark as midnight waves, eyes holding the melancholy of a king who had opened gates to wolves in his name. I saw," she whispered, voice barely above the wind's sigh, her fingers brushing the necklace as if it could shield her vulnerability. "You're hurt. Let me—" He tensed, hand tightening on the dagger, curiosity flickering in his gaze like embers refusing to die. "An Omega, alone in these peaks. What game is this?" Suspicion laced his words, but beneath it, a spark of recognition, as if the Deusa had woven their threads in the loom of fate. The connection hummed, instinctive, pulling at her core, yet she resisted, rationalizing it as survival's illusion. He was a stranger, marked by blood and shadow. She, a spy in her own tale, cast out for whispers she never spoke. The squall howled louder, driving snow into their faces, but neither moved, locked in the fragile dance of fear and unspoken need. His blood dripped onto the white, staining it red, a symbol as potent as the vial at her throat. What strength was there in aiding a fallen king when her own throne was ash? Yet in his eyes she glimpsed the wound every Alpha carried, the guilt of command, the betrayal of trust, and wondered if her hands, meant for healing, could mend what exile had broken in them both. As the wind wailed its ancient lament, carrying the scent of blood and pine into the night, Ilara knelt beside him, her choice teetering on the edge of the storm. "And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. Ilara's fingers trembled as they pressed against the Alpha's wound, the warmth of his blood seeping through her palms like a forbidden confession. The squall raged on, a furious veil that blurred the ravine's edges, turning the world into a churning sea of white. Snow lashed her face, stinging like needles of judgment, but she held her ground, kneeling in the crimson slush beside him. His breath came in shallow rasps, each one a labored defiance against the cold that clawed at them both. The invaders' fire had guttered out in the fray, embers scattered like the remnants of his trust, leaving only the moon's pale gaze to illuminate their fragile truce. "Who are you?" he murmured, his voice a rumble low, as distant thunder, eyes half-lidded but sharp, searching her face with the intensity of a man who had learned to question every shadow. She hesitated, the weight of her exile pressing like the ice-crusted pines around them. Ilara, the accused spy, healer of a pack that had cast her out. How could she speak her name to this stranger, whose scent wrapped around her like chains of instinct? The connection pulsed between them, an undercurrent of alpha-omega pull that she fought to ignore, rationalizing it as the storm's delirium. Yet her hands moved of their own accord, tearing a strip from her cloak to bind his gash, the fabric soaking through instantly with his blood. "Ilara," she whispered finally, the word tasting of ash on her tongue. "Exiled. Like you, it seems." Her gaze flicked to the invaders' fallen forms, their bodies half buried in the snow, silent witnesses to the violence that had bound them. One twitched faintly, a groan escaping his lips, and fear spiked through her, sharp, visceral, the cold amplifying every sound. They weren't all dead. The third had fled, but his kin might rally, drawn by the scent of blood that now mingled with pine and frost in the air. He shifted, wincing as he propped himself against the rock, his mantle falling open to reveal the intricate scars across his chest, marks of battles and betrayals etched like maps of a kingdom lost. "Thorn," he said, the name heavy with the echo of crowns, "King of the Frostclaws, or what remains." Guilt shadowed his features, a melancholy veil that deepened the lines around his eyes. Storm-grey and haunted, he had opened the gates once, he confessed in fragments, his general's treachery a blade that pierced deeper than any sword. Invaders had poured through, his people slaughtered under a moon that watched without mercy. Now he fled his own ruins, cursed by the Deuce's silence, seeking redemption in the wilds that devoured the weak. Ilara's heart twisted, empathy blooming unbidden amidst the fear. She knew exile's bite, the shame of suspicion that branded the soul. Her fingers brushed the necklace at her throat, the vial's blood, her own, sworn in futile loyalty, warming slightly against her skin, as if responding to his pain. "The gates." "You blame yourself," she said softly, tying off the bandage with hands steadier than she felt. The wind howled, carrying weavos from the peaks, a chorus that spoke of approaching peril. She glanced up, the moon fracturing through the clouds like a shattered vow, its light silvering the snow into a deceptive calm. Thorn's hand caught her wrist, gentle but firm, his touch igniting a spark that raced through her veins, instinctive, undeniable. Yet she pulled back, denial surging like the gale. "Don't!" she breathed, rationalizing the warmth as mere survival, not the bond the Deucer wove in blood and shadow. But his eyes held hers, curiosity softening the edges of his suspicion, a mirror to her own fractured trust. "You fought for a stranger. Why?" Before she could answer, a crack echoed through the ravine, the snap of branches under heavy boots. The third invader had returned. Not alone. Shadows multiplied in the swirling snow, 5 more figures emerging from the tree line, their armor glinting with foreign runes, axes drawn and gleaming under the lunar glow. Their leader, a brute with a scar bisecting his face, bellowed a challenge, his voice cutting through the storm like a war cry. The traitor king and his little shadow, finish them both! Thorn surged to his feet, dagger in hand, his body a coiled spring despite the blood loss. "Run!" he growled to Ilara, positioning himself between her and the advancing threat, his broad frame a shield against the night. But she didn't flee. The cold fury of her exile ignited something deeper, a quiet resolve born of rejection. The necklace swung free, the vial catching the moonlight, its blood stirring as if alive. She grabbed a fallen branch, its weight unfamiliar in her healer's hands, and stood beside him, heart pounding with the rhythm of shared defiance. The clash erupted in a whirlwind of steel and snow, axes whistling, Thorn's movements a deadly ballet honed by years of command. Each parry laced with the weight of his guilt, he felled one with a precise thrust, blood spraying hot against the frost. But another landed a glancing blow to his shoulder, reopening the wound. Ilara cried out, the sound raw, instinct driving her forward. She swung the branch, cracking it against an attacker's knee, the impact jarring through her arms like fire. Pain bloomed in her side as a fist connected, but she twisted away, her Omega agility a fleeting grace in the chaos. They fought back to back, an unspoken alliance forged in the heat of peril. Thorn's presence anchored her, his growls mingling with her sharp breaths, the air thick with the scent of sweat, blood, and burning resolve. One invader lunged at her, blade raised, but Thorn intercepted, his arm wrapping around her waist to yank her aside, their bodies pressing close in the frenzy, warmth against cold, strength against fragility. The contact sent a shiver through her, not of fear, but of something tender, nascent, blooming in the midst of violence. Empathy shifted, threads of bond weaving tighter. In his protection, she glimpsed the king beneath the wounds, ethical and burdened, choosing mercy even as he spilled blood. The leader charged Thorn, axe arcing high, but Ilara's voice broke free. A howl, not of weakness, but primal, bone-deep, echoing off the cliffs like the Deuce's own call. It shattered the night, stunning the attackers, their advance faltering as if the moon itself had roared. Thorn seized the moment, driving his dagger home, the brute crumpling into the snow, the others scattered, vanishing into the storm with curses swallowed by the wind. Panting, they collapsed together against the rock, the ravine falling silent save for the gale's mournful sigh. Thorn's hand lingered on her arm, his touch a question, curiosity deepening into something like wonder. That howl, "You saved us." His voice was soft, laced with the melancholy of a man seeing destiny's hand. Ilara met his gaze, the necklace's vial pulsing warm now. Its blood, a symbol of the ties they couldn't deny. Fear still lingered, but so did the spark of connection, resisted yet undeniable. Love as proof, not prize, forged in the crucible of shared survival. Yet, as the snow settled, doubt crept in like frost. Could she trust this king, whose past echoed her own accusations of betrayal? The moon watched, impartial, as their breaths synced in the quiet. The bond teetering on the edge of acceptance. What was redemption, if not choosing to heal amidst the ruins? The wind whispered no answers, only the promise of trials yet to come. The moon hung low, a fractured sentinel over the ravine, its silver light pooling in the crimson craters left by the fray. Ilara's body ached, a tapestry of bruises blooming beneath her skin like hidden fires. But it was the warmth of Thorn's arm, still lingering from the chaos, that unsettled her most. They sat pressed against the unyielding rock, the snow a damp shroud around them, its chill seeping through her torn cloak like fingers of doubt. His breath synced with hers, ragged at first, then steadying into a rhythm that echoed the distant weavos weaving through the pines. The air carried the metallic bite of blood, mingling with the sharp resin of shattered branches and the faint, acrid smoke from the long-extinguished fire. She pulled away slightly. The contact too intimate, too insistent, stirring the instinctive pull she rationalized as mere adrenaline's echo. Thorn's eyes, storm grey and shadowed by lashes clotted with frost, fixed on her with the intensity that peeled back her defenses. "That sound you made," he said, his voice a low timbre, resonant as the earth's hidden rumble. "It wasn't just a cry. It commanded the night." He shifted, wincing as fresh blood welled from his reopened wound, staining the makeshift bandage she'd fashioned. His mantle, ragged and heavy with the weight of fallen kingship, draped over them both like a shared exile. Guilt etched his features deeper now, the melancholy of a ruler who had trusted too freely, whose general's betrayal had unleashed rivers of blood upon his people. He had opened the gates, he had admitted in the quiet lulls between blows, believing loyalty's oath unbreakable, only to watch invaders flood the Frostclaw halls, flames devouring the tapestries of his lineage under a merciless lunar gaze. Ilara's fingers instinctively touched the necklace, the vial's etched phases catching the moonlight in a prismatic shiver. The blood within, her own, sworn in the pack's ritual, felt alive now, warmer than the surrounding cold, as if it stirred in response to his words. She had always dismissed the whispers of her gift, the subtle vibrations she felt in the wind, the way shadows seemed to part for her in the dim corridors of her old life. The pack had called her a spy for her uncanny knack of sensing hidden paths, of overhearing truths in the rustle of leaves or the cadence of distant howls. But it was more, a pathfinder's blood, inherited from some forgotten Omega line blessed by the Deucer, allowing her to unravel deceptions, to guide through the veils of fate. Exile had buried it deep, twisted it into accusation, but in the heat of battle it had surged forth unbidden, a howl that wasn't mere sound, but a revelation, bending the air like will made manifest. "I don't know what it was," she lied softly, her voice trembling not from cold, but from the fear of unveiling herself. The wind whipped through the ravine, carrying flakes that stung her cheeks, blurring the world into a haze of white and shadow. Yet clarity sharpened within her, drawn to him like moonlight to snow. Images flickered at the edges of her mind, gates yawning open in a storm-swept castle, a general's smirk beneath a hooded cloak, the spill of blood on ancient stone. Not her memories, but his, echoes pulled from the bond's fragile threads, her gift probing the wounds of his soul. She gasped, pulling her hand from the vial as if burned, the visions retreating like mist before dawn. Thorn leaned closer, his scent enveloping her, earth and storm undercut by the salt of unshed tears. His hand, calloused from hilts and thrones, covered hers on the necklace, the touch igniting a spark that raced through her veins, undeniable now, resisting rationalization. "You do know," he murmured, curiosity yielding to certainty, his ethical core, the king who weighed every life against duty, seeing through her veil. "I've sought a sign from the Deucer since the fall, a guide through the betrayal's labyrinth, and here you are, exiled like me, your cry shattering the invaders as if the moon itself lent you voice." His eyes darkened with the weight of realization, melancholy deepening into awe. She was the key. He sensed it in the hum of their connection, the way her presence quieted the chaos in his blood. The Pathfinder, born to close what traitors had torn open, to lead him back to redemption's throne. But Ilara recoiled, the intimacy a blade to her fragile trust. "I'm no savior," she whispered, the words tasting of the snow's bitterness. "They called me spy for seeing too much, for knowing paths I shouldn't. What if your gates were my doing? What if the Deucer mocks us both?" Doubt clawed at her, the ethical dilemma twisting like the wind. To embrace the gift meant risking another betrayal, binding her fate to his guilt-ridden quest. Freedom whispered in the gale, "Flee into the peaks, let the wilds claim her secrets." Yet the vial pulsed hotter, its blood a crimson beacon, urging revelation. The howl had been no accident. It was her essence, a bone-shattering call that could seal breaches in stone and spirit alike. Thorn's grip tightened, not in demand but plea, his voice laced with the philosopher's gravity. What is destiny, if not the choice to trust the unseen? I've carried this wound, opening the gates to slaughter, long enough. If you're the key, Ilara, then let us turn it together. The moon broke through the clouds fully now, bathing them in ethereal light, the snow around their forms gleaming like a temple's marble. Weavos rose again, closer, a pack's chorus that might be kin or foe, drawn by the scent of spilled blood and awakened power. She met his gaze, the bond pulling taut, her hidden gift unfurling like a rose in frost. Petals of vision revealing fragments of his path, a temple lunar ahead, where truths would demand sacrifice. Empathy warred with fear, the tenderness born in pain now demanding acceptance. Could she heal his betrayal with her own scarred sight? The wind howled its challenge, the necklace's vial glowing faintly, blood within swirling as if alive with the Deusa's breath. In that moment, under the fractured moon, Ilara felt the weight of fates intertwining, her revelation not a crown, but a crossroads etched in ice and fire. As the weavers crested the ridge, shadows lengthening into threats, Thorn rose, pulling her with him, their hands clasped in silent vow. The night deepened, pregnant with the trials that would test if redemption could bridge the chasm of doubt. The shadows of the ridge coalesced into forms, hulking silhouettes against the moon's unyielding glare, their eyes reflecting the feral hunger of the wilds. Ilara's hand tightened in Thorn's, the vial at her throat thrumming like a second heartbeat, its blood swirling in crimson eddies that caught the lunar light. The Wuvos crested into a cacophony, not distant echoes now, but a pack's thunderous approach. Her own, the Iron Peak's exiled kin, drawn by the scent of Invaders' blood and the unnatural howl that had rent the night. Betrayal's echo returned, not as whisper, but as a tide crashing against her fragile resolve. Thorn pulled her behind a jagged outcrop, his body a barrier of heat and steel resolve, the wounds on his frame seeping fresh crimson into the snow. "Stay low," he breathed, his voice a gravelly anchor amid the storm's wail, but his eyes, storm-grey, etched with the melancholy of thrones forsaken, betrayed the war within. He had fled his Frostclaw halls, haunted by the general's knife in the dark, the gates yawning open to slaughter under his unwitting command. Now, fate dragged him back to judgment, the Deuce's cruel symmetry binding his guilt to her exile. Ilara's gift stirred unbidden, visions fracturing her sight, the Pack's alpha, a former guardian, snarling accusations of espionage. Thorn's traitor general, a shadow with a rival's ambition, whispering poisons that toppled kingdoms. The pack burst into the ravine, a whirlwind of fur and fang, their breath steaming in the frigid air, like accusations made manifest. At their fore loomed Riven, the Iron Peak's alpha, his pelt matted with frost, eyes burning with the righteous fury of one who enforced unity through iron will. Flanking him were the Betas, scarred warriors whose loyalty had branded her a spy for glimpsing truths they buried. Maps of invasion routes she'd overheard in fevered dreams, paths revealed by her Pathfinder blood. "The traitor returns!" Riven bellowed, his voice booming off the cliffs, paws churning snow into slush. And with an alpha scent clinging to her like stolen fire. "Ilara, you opened your legs to the enemy?" Her chest constricted, the cold air knifing through her lungs as shame and rage warred in equal measure. The necklace burned against her skin, the vial's blood a hot pulse, urging her to unleash the howl once more, to shatter illusions as it had the Invaders. But doubt clawed deeper. Was this confrontation her past's reckoning, or Thorn's? She stepped forward, snow crunching under her boots, the wind tearing at her cloak like the pack's judgments. "I am no traitor," she called, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. the scent of pine and blood thickening the air. Exiled for shadows you cast yourselves. The invaders at our gates. Did you not sense the rot within? Riven's laugh was a guttural bark, echoing the betrayal that mirrored Thorn's own. Behind the pack, another figure emerged from the tree line, a sleek wolf with eyes like polished obsidian shifting fluidly into man form. Kale, Thorn's former general, the architect of Frostclaw's fall, his lips curled in a smirk that bespoke rival ambitions. He had fled north after the gate's breach, allying with border packs, his treachery a poison, spreading like frostbite. "The weak Omega speaks of rot?" Kyle sneered, his voice silken venom, circling with the grace of a predator who had tasted power's edge. "You both reek of it. Thorn, you trusted me with your crown's keys, and now this spy whispers your redemption. The Deucer laughs at such folly." Thorn tensed beside her, his hand finding the dagger's hilt, the mantle's ragged edges fluttering like a fallen banner. Guilt shadowed his features, the ethical king who had chosen mercy for his general, now facing the blade of consequence. "Kyle," he growled, stepping into the open, snow yielding under his weight, "you opened the gates to invaders for a rival's throne. My people burned while you bartered their blood." The air crackled with tension, the moon casting long shadows that danced like spectres of the slain, Weavos fading into a charged silence broken only by the wind's mournful sigh. Ilara's vision surged, her gift a torrent now, fragments of Kale's deceit, forged missives in Riven's hand, alliances sealed in blood oaths that tainted her pack's borders. The vial glowed faintly, its contents roiling as if the Deucer poured her judgment through it. She could howl, expose the web of lies binding traitor and alpha. But at what cost? Freedom beckoned in the storm's embrace. Slip away, let these kings devour each other, her exile unbroken. Or bind to Thorn, forgive the past's echoes in his arms, wage war, not with fang but truth, choosing love as redemption's forge. Riven lunged first, a blur of muscle and fury, jaws snapping toward Thorn's throat. The ravine erupted, clash of bodies against rock, snow spraying in visceral arcs, the metallic tang of blood sharpening the cold. Thorn met him mid-air, a roar tearing from his chest, his form shifting partially to wolf, claws raking fur. Kale circled Ilara, his human guise mocking, eyes gleaming with the rival's hunger. "Join me, little spy," he cooed, voice laced with false honey. "Your gift could crown a true king, not this guilt-ridden fool." Her heart thundered, the bond with Thorn pulling like lunar tide. His pain echoed in her veins, his ethical core a beacon amid the fray. She rationalized it still, the pull as survival's lie. But the tenderness born in refuge demanded more. With a cry that built from her depths, she unleashed the howl, not bone-shattering fury, but a resonant wave that rippled through the air, unveiling truths like mist burned by dawn. Visions assailed them. Kale's hand on the gate's lever, Riven's unwitting seal on invasion pacts, blood oaths sworn under false moons. The pack faltered, Riven pinning Thorn but hesitating as the revelations pierced his mind. Kyle snarled, lunging at her, but Thorn broke free, barreling into him with the force of pent guilt, fangs sinking into shoulder. Blood sprayed hot and coppery, staining the snow in deepening red, the vial at Ilara's throat absorbing it like a talisman of shared wounds. She staggered back, the moral crux tearing at her. Forgive Riven's blindness, Thorn's trust, or unleash war's full howl, freedom's price, her isolation eternal. As Kale crumpled, gasping curses into the frost, Riven shifted to man, eyes wide with dawning horror. The traitor, both packs poisoned. Thorn rose, bloodied but unbowed, his gaze seeking hers across the carnage, plea and promise intertwined. The wind howled its ethical dirge. The moon witnessing her crossroads, lover's chain or liberation's blade, empathy swelled, the deuce's symbols, blood, fire's embers in distant memory, the vial's glow, whispering that strength lay in mercy's choice, not vengeance's roar. Yet as the pack circled warily, loyalties fracturing like ice, Elara felt the weight of impending sacrifice. Redemption hovered, a fragile flame against the night, demanding she choose, bind their fates in forgiveness's forge, or shatter them in freedom's cold grasp. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken verdicts, the bloodied snow a canvas for the soul's trial. The snow-laden silence stretched taut as a bowstring, the ravine's air thick with the steam of exertion, and the coppery reek of fresh spilled blood. Elara stood at the heart of the fray, her chest heaving, the vial at her throat a molten weight against her skin, its contents churning like a storm-tossed sea under the moon's fractured gaze. The pack encircled them, Riven's betas shifting uneasily on paws and boots, their eyes darting between their alpha and the fallen Kale, whose form lay twisted in the crimson slush, gasping wetly as life ebbed from his treacherous veins. Thorn loomed beside her, his partial shift receding, fur melting back to scarred flesh, his breath a ragged fog that mingled with hers in the chill. His hand, slick with blood not his own, brushed hers, a tentative anchor, the ethical king seeking not conquest, but absolution in her choice. Riven rose to his full height, the alpha's form a tower of muscle and frost-matted hair. His eyes, once unyielding as iron, now fractured with the revelations her Howl had unearthed. The visions lingered in the air like spectral threads, woven by her Pathfinder gift, Kale's forged oaths, Riven's blinded seals on pacts that invited invaders through the peak's hidden passes, Thorn's unwitting trust, opening the Frostclaw gates to the same shadowed horde. Betrayal's web-spanned pacts, a poison born of ambition that had exiled her, toppled his throne and stained the snow with kin-blood under indifferent lunar light. The rot. It was us, Riven murmured, voice cracking like thawing ice, the weight of his judgments crashing down. He glanced at Elara, shame etching lines into his weathered face. The alpha who had banished gentleness for fear now seeing the Deuce's cruel mirror. Kale's laugh bubbled through bloodied lips, a final venomous rasp. Fools! All of you, power isn't mercy, it's the blade that claims the weak. He lunged weakly, claws scraping snow, but Thorn's boot pinned his shoulder, the king's melancholy hardening into resolve. And you wielded it for scraps, Thorn replied, his tone grave as a funeral dirge, the guilt of his past, opening gates to slaughter, fueling not rage, but the philosopher's clarity. What was strength, if not choosing compassion over the throne's cold hunger? Elara felt it echo in her soul, the bond with him no longer resisted but embraced, a rational acceptance born of shared ruin. Love as the proof that healed what exile had torn. The betas growled low, loyalties splintering like the wind-whipped pines, some advancing with bared fangs, others hesitating, drawn by the howl's lingering resonance. Fear clawed at Elara's gut, sharp as the cold biting her exposed skin, but beneath it bloomed faith, the Deuce's whisper in the vial's pulse, urging rebirth from despair. Freedom tempted still, a solitary path into the storm where no bonds could betray, but the tenderness forged in refuge demanded more. To close the gates Kyle had pried open, not with steel, but with the soul's unyielding howl. She stepped forward, snow yielding under her feet like a reluctant confession, her hand clasping Thorn's fully now, their warmth a defiant fire against the frost. "Riven," she called, her voice steady, laced with the quiet authority her gift had awakened. "The invaders come not from without, but the lies we swallowed. Join us, or let the Deucer judge your pact to ruin." The Alpha's gaze locked on hers, the moral crux hanging in the balance. War's roar, perpetuating the cycle of blood and shadow, or forgiveness's fragile bridge, Power yielded to compassion. The wind howled its dirge, carrying distant weavos that swelled into a chorus. The border pack stirring, drawn by the scent of upheaval, gates metaphorical and real yawning toward conquest. Riven's shoulders slumped, the Alpha's pride fracturing under the weight of truth. "Exile was my blindness," he admitted, voice raw as exposed bone, stepping back to signal his betas. They stilled. The circle parting like mist before dawn, a tentative alliance born of revelation. But Kale twisted free in a desperate surge, his form shifting to wolf, lunging toward the ravine's narrow pass, the very gate to the peaks where invaders massed beyond, their fires flickering like malevolent stars on the horizon. "Then die with your mercy," he snarled, bolting toward the breach, his flight a spark to ignite the horde. Ilara's heart thundered, the vial igniting in her chest, blood within boiling as the Deuce's power surged through her veins. No more denial. This was her rebirth, the weak Omega spy becoming the closer of fates. She released Thorn's hand, stepping into the open, the moon crowning her in silver as she drew breath deep from the frozen core of her being. The howl erupted, not a cry of pain, but a bone-shattering symphony, resonant and visceral, rippling outward like waves crashing against stone. It shattered the night, the sound weaving through flesh and spirit, commanding the air itself. Kyle faltered mid-stride, his body convulsing as the truth's full weight crushed him, visions of his treacheries replaying in relentless clarity, his form collapsing into the snow, lifeless, the traitor sealed in his own deceit. The pass trembled, snow avalanching down in a thunderous cascade, burying the narrow trail under tons of ice and rock. A natural gate closed by her will made manifest. The invaders' distant shouts swallowed by the roar. The horde beyond would find no easy path. Their advance halted by the Deuce's hand through her voice. Ilara staggered, the effort draining her like blood from a vein. But Thorn caught her, his arms enveloping her in unyielding warmth, their bond sealing in union's quiet fire. "You closed them," he whispered, lips brushing her temple, his melancholy lifting like fog burned by dawn, guilt transmuted to gratitude. Love, not as reward, but redemption's forge, his wounds healed by her sight, her exile reborn as destiny's key. Riven approached, head bowed in rare submission, the packs merging under the moon's approving glow. "We follow the Pathfinder now," he vowed, the betas echoing with low affirmatives, faith triumphing over despair. The wind softened to a sigh, carrying the scent of pine and thawing earth, the bloodied snow already blanketed in fresh white, a canvas renewed. Ilara leaned into Thorn, the vial cooling against her skin, its blood stilled in harmony, symbols of their shared rebirth, sacrifice in truth, healing in mercy, union against the storm. As the first hints of dawn silvered the peaks, the fractured moon faded, yielding to light that promised not ease, but enduring strength. In the quiet, with packs united and gates sealed, Ilara knew the Deuce's lesson. Every wound carried a hidden howl, every rejection a path to crown the fallen. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.